Good afternoon. Welcome back. It's a pleasure to see you all in person again. We get to continue our conversation, I think, on a theme that was really the theme we started with, and I'm sure we'll continue with, which is not only the war in Ukraine, but the question of reconstruction for Ukraine. And when we talk about that, the term that comes to mind to almost everyone is a question of a Marshall Plan for Ukraine. But what does it mean? What would it mean? What would be the elements? And we're going to focus on that. Surely it's about scale, it's about transatlantic cooperation, it's about strategic purpose. And to have a focused conversation on that question, we're really very pleased to have a wonderful panel, which will have introduced to you very shortly. But let me reintroduce to you again, Ravi Agrawal, to moderate our conversation. Ravi, thank you. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, everyone, for coming back so quickly after that coffee break. As you just heard, I mean, this is a really important question we're all here to grapple with. Unlike the original Marshall Plan, the challenge is twofold in that war is still underway. And of course, while on the one hand you have so many people tasked with ending this war, it's just as important. In fact, we would be doing ourselves a disservice, would be doing the world a disservice if we didn't think ahead to how to reconstruct Ukraine once this war inevitably is over, as we fight to ensure that it is. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guests here. Our goal is going to be to push towards solutions, to think about specifics, what kinds of actions we need to put in place now, where to raise money, who takes the lead, what kinds of things, what other considerations countries and Ukraine need to put in place right now. Those are the things we'll focus on, and we'll bring you in as well. I'll take a few audience questions towards the end, so please have a think about those ahead of time. Our guests, without further ado, are, I have Representative Steve Cohen from Memphis. He is also a co-chair of the Helsinki Commission. And he joined us here after a fair bit of travel troubles, I believe, but welcome. We have Martin Klus. He's the Deputy Foreign Minister of Slovakia. Welcome to you. Odile Renaud-Bassot, she's the President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Welcome to you, ma'am. And lastly, as you heard earlier, we have a representative from Ukraine. We heard earlier from the Deputy Prime Minister. Joining us now is Hanna Hopko. She was in the audience earlier. She was a member of parliament in Ukraine, led the Foreign Affairs Committee there, is not in office right now, but is able to share her frank insights with us. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to the four of you. Thank you to everyone. So let's get started. Congressman, I thought I'd begin with you. The idea of a Marshall Plan, given what you do in the United States as a congressman, given your work with the Helsinki Commission, when you think of a Marshall Plan for Ukraine, what's on your mind? What do you think the first steps would be for the world to take?
Well, an interesting question. First, I want to thank the German Marshall Fund for having this discussion. It's most important that we have it and prepare for a rebuilding of Ukraine, which is going to happen. The world has come together, at least the Western world. I appreciate my president's efforts and Boris Johnson's and Macron's, and basically the entire Western world has come together strongly in support of Ukraine, as they should, because this is a battle against all of us and Western values, and Putin would not stop at Ukraine. The war has gone now nearly 4 months, February, March, April, May, June, 4 months, and at first everybody said, the ones that's supposed to know, the pros from Dover, they said that Kyiv will fall in 24 to 48 hours. Well, they didn't know about the Ukrainian spirit, and they didn't factor that into their analysis. Now it's been 4 months, and it's going to go, and things are going to turn better. I think we've seen some disturbing signs in the East where Soviets have used, or the Russians have used, their immense power to kind of bully over and take some areas, but it's not going to help. But we need to stay united, and we have stayed united, and we need to plan for this. There are approximately $300 billion, I think, in Russian banks that the United States and Britain and Italy and France and Germany and other countries have taken or plan to take. And those are monies that could and should be used for the beginnings of rebuilding Ukraine, for who's responsible for the destruction but Putin and Russia. Representative Malinowski, one of my colleagues in Congress, and I have introduced a bill to have those monies that the United States has control over assigned to Ukraine for those purposes. And I believe that there's such a proposal before the EU as well that's backed strongly by the Baltic countries and others to see those monies go to the rebuilding of Ukraine. Ukraine's infrastructure is pretty much devastated. Rail, all the infrastructure is devastated. And that needs to be built up first to give a platform for private sector investment. But we need to see what Zelensky wants, what Ukraine wants, and follow their lead. And that's important that we do that, and it's important that we stick together in supporting the rebuilding of Ukraine. What's happened there has really been criminal. The cost will be tremendous. It could be, some have said 600 billion. I would think closer to $1 trillion. It's going to be a lot of money. But there are a lot of good things that could come out of this. And besides standing up for Ukraine and for democracy and against the autocracy and the illegal invasion, the rebuilding can have a lot of green elements in it. Congressman Costa is here, one of my colleagues, and he knows about the importance that we can see it in green and climate change and seeing that Ukraine is a model in many ways in the future, as distinguished from some of the antiquated works of Russia, depending on coal and gas and fuels we need to get away from, because our Earth is challenged as well. The oceans are in jeopardy. The land, everything in our planet Earth is in jeopardy, and largely because of fossil fuels, and that's Russia. So there's a lot we need to do, and we need to plan early, and we let people know we're there, and we're planning for Ukraine to be around.
So let me bring in Odile on this, since your daily job is essentially, trying to point money in the right direction across reconstruction efforts in Europe. What's your sense? I mean, Congressman mentioned $1 trillion. Is that a sum that you think is realistic to rebuild Ukraine, given what we know now?
It's very difficult to have a figure now because we are still in the middle of the war. So I think my first point is that it's very important to start about thinking reconstruction and preparing for reconstruction and so forth, but it's also very important to help Ukraine now, to help Ukraine fighting the war. And there is a lot of need for military support, but also economic and financial support. We know that the needs, for example, for the government to be able to continue to function, to pay civil servants, to pay pension and so forth, the financial needs are assessed between 3-5 billion a month. And there has been a lot of mobilization, G7 commitment to deliver through different means budget support. There is also a lot of needs to keep the economy afloat, and that's a bit what we are doing, EBRD, focusing a lot on key infrastructure, financing, for example, electricity company to keep the electricity network functioning, railway company functioning, providing liquidity to these companies to help them keeping the business going on, but also the private sector, trade finance, agribusiness, pharmaceutical, and so forth. Because the more the economy is sustained now and continues to function, and I must say, we were all absolutely, impressed. We are still absolutely impressed by the resilience of the governments, of the parliament, all the institutions continuing to function, and the private sector, private business continue also to deliver whenever they can, wherever they can, on their activity. So the more we provide support to Ukraine now, the less we would have, the needs for reconstruction will be. That's my first point. But then, of course, there is a huge amount of destruction, and I think the assessment of physical destruction of infrastructure, building, and so forth is something like 100 billion, and then there is all the loss of opportunities. So I think in terms of rebuilding and refinancing, we will talk about hundreds of billions, and it will require a huge effort from the international community. If there are some assets that can be used, I understand quite a lot of legally speaking, it's not so easy, but I think that should also be done. And there are a lot of questions also about organization, coordination. One interesting thing is comparing in terms of volume, compared to this Marshall Plan, I think what we are talking about is much more in size than what was Marshall Plan in terms of percentage of GDP and so forth. And the idea would be also to have it much quicker, because I think, as you mentioned in your introductory points, the key issue, I think, will be to be able to start reconstructing some of the infrastructure, some key, buildings and so forth, even if the war is still going on some part of the countries. It may be the case, and at least I think we need to be prepared to start reconstructing, even if we are not in a full-fledged peace agreement, which we don't know when will it come.
Right.
So, and I think that's a big challenge.
So you're being very realistic in saying, A, we don't know how long this war is going to go on for, but B, it might not be a clean break.
Exactly.
Just very quickly, before I bring the others in, obviously, China has not really... China's been on Russia's side pretty much on this war, but there are many countries that have sat on the fence, refused to condemn Russia. I'm thinking of India, other countries in the global south, many countries that actually are able to raise funds. Would a Marshall Plan accept money from countries that sat on the fence?
I think the money, wherever it comes from, should be, investors should be welcome and so forth. I think that, I don't know whether there will be some appetite to provide resources, but I think because the needs will be huge, so I think that, every investor should be welcome.
Right, right. And of course, much of this will include the private sector, which will be difficult to avoid in a sense. Martin, let me bring you in, Deputy Foreign Minister of Slovakia, of course. What's your sense of, the last few days have seen, a moment, I think, for Russia where they've been on the ascendancy, in a sense, in this war. They've managed to sort of, in the east, they've managed to take some areas that they didn't have before. They bombed Kiev, of course, on Sunday. What's your sense from where you sit of how far we might be from a point where we can think about reconstruction?
First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's very important to have such a discussion here, and I'm very grateful for German Marshall Fund to have opportunity to speak on behalf of the neighbor country. We understand how critical situation is in Ukraine as long as we are having our own historical experience with an invasion in 1968. And I have a simple answer. The best Marshall Plan for Ukraine is to bring European perspective to this country, because that brings a lot, especially if it comes to very short-term perspective. And we did a historical moment last week as we allow candidacy status for Ukraine. And I believe this was one of the most important steps we can do. Speaking on behalf of a country which 18 years ago became member of the European Union, I can't imagine not to be part of the European Union and NATO nowadays in our country. In a country where still 25%, even more, of the population believe that Vladimir Putin is a nice guy and peacekeeper all around the world, I can't imagine how this should look like, this very tricky game Russians are playing with us if we are not members of EU and NATO. And this is the same with Ukraine now. So that's why we introduced a so-called EU plan for Ukraine in March time. And we are very grateful that part of it is already done, which was the candidacy status, but we need some short, mid-term and long-term activities. And let me tell you very briefly what we mean by short-term activities. It was already been said here that as far as we know, around $7 billion per month Ukraine needs in a very short term. And that's why it is very important what we are doing already if it comes to the fundraising all around the world. And I'm very grateful to all the organizations which are helping us with that. Then we have this midterm, and this is the most important for us because this midterm means that we have to prepare private and public sector to be ready for reconstruction process. And it's not easy, especially in our part of the world. And we need also some kind of partial integration of Ukraine in energy sector, for instance. We need to allow them to be part of European policies. Now they are part of 10 out of 42, as far as I remember. We need to allow them to be part of Erasmus program, for instance, and many other European programs. And I believe this could bring completely different angle also for Ukrainians, why they are fighting for and for what they are fighting for. And last but not least, long-term perspective, of course, it's a reconstruction as such. and then a safe return of migrants. This is also very important because it will be very, very complicated to build new Ukraine without 6 million people who already left country, many of them to Slovakia. And I believe we need to do our best to help these people to come back whenever it will be safe enough to come back, including those who are internally displaced persons, because they also need some kind of safeguards to go back to the areas they're coming from. This is what we need to do all together. And we are ready to share our experiences. So far, we run around 400 programs in Western Balkan. So I hope during the candidacy activities of Ukraine, we can help also to Ukraine with these programs. And last but not least, and that's a very challenging question to all of us, how to bring Russia to the reconstruction process, because they have to feel that they are fully responsible for what has happened in Ukraine. So I hope this should come hand in hand, and I believe we have to do something also with Russia, because what is happening now, it's really a tragic situation, and I'm afraid this is not the end of the game.
I fear it isn't either. Thank you for those thoughts. Let me bring in Hannah. We heard earlier from your Deputy Prime Minister about her sense of what a Marshall Plan for Ukraine could look like. I know this is an issue you've worked on in great detail. As you are here and you listen to all these perspectives, what's your reaction? What are we missing?
First, let me express our gratitude for all civilized nations for helping Ukraine for all these months, but actually the war started in 2014. So I think it's really important in case of protracted war scenario or long-term war scenario to have the strategic patience, understanding and support to win over Russian totalitarianism. And of course, I think the candidate status for Ukraine and Moldova is a powerful geopolitical signal that Ukraine is not anymore the buffer zone or Ukraine-Moldova countries in between. So actually, this is a very powerful message also to Kremlin regime that EU is becoming a geopolitical player. But also, I think it's really important to help Ukraine to win faster. So no doubt that Ukraine is winning and will win the war. 95% of the population strongly believe that this time, the historical time, that even God's purpose to help Ukraine to win. So the question is how to help Ukraine to win faster. So actually, I'm very thankful to Rammstein coalition and US leadership for providing us with weapons. We need more. And regarding the Marshall Plan or reconstruction recovery plan for Ukraine, we need probably similar Rammstein recovery plan coalition when it will be not just transatlantic, but also countries like Japan, Australia could join to help Ukraine to become a successful model. Because here, Ukraine's victory is geopolitically, strategically important for the whole world to stop totalitarianism, authoritarian regimes. It's important for countries in Indo-Pacific region. It's important for our neighbors like Georgia and Moldova because it's their historical chance to restore territorial integrity and sovereignty. It's also important for people living in Belarus and fighting with Lukashenko dictator. So, but it's also important for our people because we faced a genocide, man-made famine organized by Stalin last century. So we survived, and now the genocidal war, which is happening every hour in Ukraine and especially in occupied territories like Kherson Oblast, atrocities, war crimes, rapes of kids. It's happening when we are sitting here. So this is why I'm really very thankful to Congress and you, Steve Cohen, for your initiative to recognize Russian war against Ukraine as a genocide. And actually Russia should be recognized as a state sponsor of terrorism. Because what they are doing, it's nuclear terror by occupying the biggest Zaporizhia nuclear power plant. What they are doing, weaponizing the export of food. This is how they are threatening the whole world with famine. Also, they are weaponizing war crimes also. So I think it's really important for the all of us to help Ukraine to win faster, because as Prime Minister of Belgium mentioned, that also this inflation rates. And also, I think we have to explain the societies at the European continent, in the US, and globally, why it's in the interest of the whole world that Ukraine is winning this war. And regarding the recovery plan, I think for short-term strategy, the more weapons we receive, the better our, and we have more advantages to deoccupy recently grabbed territories and stop war there. Also, it's important to prepare for winter season. Thank you for mentioning 5 billion per month to cover budget deficit. But in winter, I know that one of the idea of Putin and his people like Patrushev to use the practice from last century, Holodomor, when they will be deliberately attacking the state resource of grain and actually deliberately attacking heating system just before cold coming like -degrees. So just 2 weeks ago I visited Washington with the secretary of Chernihiv City Council. 100,000 people returned to Chernihiv, and they are asking a question to mayor and the secretary. Do we have some guarantees that this coming winter season we are protected? And what should we do if Russia destroy heating system, water supply, and others? So I think this is the questions we have to answer. So first, we have to fix and to stabilize the cities which are under Ukrainian control, like having air defense system, not allowing Russian to combine Holodomor approach and Kolodomor, cold, like freezing our citizens. And actually, this is key to help us with more weapons. And during this period, I'm very thankful that there are working groups, and we are preparing for Lugano conference, where our government will present their recovery plan. But the faster we win, the better chances for international business to bring investment and actually to help to rebuild Ukraine. And we have a vision how to rebuild Ukraine, because Russians are destroying our residential building, critical infrastructure, but they cannot destroy our dreams. Dreams about strong Ukraine with dignity. And even you mentioned Russia, which is, I think, really important. There will be tomorrow a panel, Russia after Putin. But I could say that victory of Ukraine is crucially important for Russian society, which has to pay reparations for us, like Nazi Germany after the World War II. An international tribunal should be in place. But I think it's also important for indigenous people living at the Russian territory, which are under persecution. And victory of Ukraine is a way to de-imperialize Russia. It's not about the change of Putin regime. It's about how to change the imperialistic nature of Russian statehood. Because from Peter the Great, it's 300 years ago, when he was renaming Moscovia, still in the name of Rus, then Soviet Union Empire, and now current Russia. So we have to change this imperialistic nature of Russian statehood, and this is the only way to go. And Putin and Russian regime, and they are afraid of successful Ukraine. So Marshall Plan is an instrument to make Ukraine a successful story for everyone, successful story for democracy.
Thank you for that answer. You know, it's becoming so clear that ending the war is the most important piece of this puzzle as we look to the future. Congressman Cohen, tough question for you. Is American support going to stay as strong as it has been? And I ask this question because America now has so many domestic issues that are going to clog the agenda for politics back home over the next few months with the midterms coming up. The Heritage Foundation is openly sort of advising not investing more in Ukraine or elsewhere for that matter. Comes off the heels of a broader American retrenchment from the rest of the world. Since you're here, can you assure people that American support will be constant, or are fears that it won't be realistic.
As much as any congressman can do that, Mr. Costa can't do it, former Congressman Hurd can't do it. I feel America will stay strong in support of Ukraine. Joe Biden is not Donald Trump, thank God. And Joe Biden understands our connection to Europe and to our Western allies, and he's made a commitment, and he will stick to it. He realizes the importance of this. There are some Republicans. Will Hurd was not a typical Republican by far. Most of the typical Republican is, there are a lot of Republicans in favor of support in Ukraine, but there's a goodly share of folks, and they're mostly the ones that don't recognize the coup d'etat that we almost experienced, that didn't even want to study it, and that continually try to put it down. There are some of those folks that don't want necessarily to support monies here for Ukraine because they want to put the money into America first. If the Republicans get control of Congress, you might see some of those people have more influence and say some things. But President Biden will stay strong. I think the Senate, we need to keep the Senate too. The elections will be interesting.
Can I push you on that? Because given how frank you are about President Trump, what do you tell people when you come to Europe who say, what's going to happen when President Trump is back in power? What's your response?
President Trump will not be back in power. The Republicans don't want President Trump. There's the MAGA folk, the hardcore MAGA folk, and there's the hardcore QAnon folk. But that's not the Republican Party. And I think that the mature parents in the room of the Republican Party will surface and see to it that they have a cogent, sane, and healthy presidential candidate.
Let's hope so. Odile, I'll bring you back in, Odile. I'd like to sort of get into a few more specifics of, we've talked a lot about the here and now, as have you. Talk us through a little bit of, let's assume now the war is either over or close to being over. What kinds of steps does the European community, does the global community need to put in place?
No, I think that then in the situation you describe, what will be very important, first of all, is to be able to provide some financial support, because reconstruction will need a lot of money. It will need also a lot of coordination, and I think that the European candidacy is a very strong anchor for the reform agenda in the country, because what will be needed is money, but also continued transformation of the country. Ukraine, before the war, had some challenges in terms of rule of law, functioning of the judicial system, corruption, role of oligarchs, and so forth. So it was a country which was transforming in the process of being reformed and transformed and so forth, but there were some challenges. I think that would need to be clearly addressed in the context of, post-war reconstruction and so forth. And the European agenda will drive a lot of this. That's what we've seen in countries like Slovakia, Poland, and so forth, because of the acquis communautaire and the need to, adjust and embrace the rule and all the legal framework of the EU. This will be a very strong drive, I think, in the transformation of the country. And I think that was why it was so important to have a positive decision there. But of course, there will be a lot of coordination between all key players, and I think the G7 will have a very important role to play because of the role of the US, the UK, EU countries, and the EU per se will have also a very important role to play to provide some money and to agree with the Ukraine. And I think ownership from Ukrainian government will be very important. And I think that's why it's also very positive to see all the work done in Ukraine today to prepare for reconstruction with the recovery plan, all these working groups which are working on defining what would be the priorities and so forth. Because it should not be imposed from international institutions or foreign countries, but really also owned by the Ukrainian government and civil society.
I have to ask, just very quickly, and then we'll take audience questions. As someone who runs a bank, are banks running dry? I mean, you're dealing with so many different problems all at once: energy crisis, inflation, food crisis, post-pandemic recovery. When I speak to bankers generally, I hear that they're as stressed as they've ever been. Your take, quickly?
No, we are stressed because what we see is that the war has a huge impact on Ukraine. Us, EBRD, we are very exposed in Ukraine. We were the first institutional investor. We have used to invest 1 billion a year. We are continuing to invest now, which is for a bank very risky, very challenging. You know, you have rating agencies looking very closely at what we are doing. So but it's not, I mean, it's Ukraine, it's also all the neighboring countries. What we see is that all countries affected by refugees, they have to, increase their spending, manage the refugee flows, but also foreign investors are much more cautious. They see all the region as unstable, so there is no more. Market appetite has completely shrinked. So there is a lot of needs, and on top of that, of course, you have energy security and food security, which is affecting already. For example, Mediterranean countries with huge increase in food and security price. Problem of political stability, problem of risk of hunger in sub-Saharan Africa and so forth. So there is a huge need for multilateral institutions like us. It's a bit our role to be counter-cyclical and to provide some support in these difficult times. But indeed, it's a challenging environment. And when you combine that with tightening of monetary policy, with the impact on risk appetite, shift in assets, prices, and so forth, it's a quite risky and challenging environment.
Indeed. Very quickly.
Kind of a follow-up what Anna said. It's a provocative question to all of us, I believe. How come that we are tolerating such a country in organizations like OECD, United Nations? I guess we are running out of time. We have to do that. Or we had to do that at the very beginning, the same way as Council of Europe simply kicked them out. If these organizations are having in their burst list peace, and this country is doing what they are doing in Ukraine, why we didn't act much more rapid way? So this is the question I'm having in my mind. I said the same at the Council of Europe, and I guess it's somehow too late, but anyway, let's think about it. And if it comes to this fatigue, I can feel that in European organizations, especially, I'm representing my country in General Affairs Council, and I can easily see that sixth package wasn't born a very easy way. And I'm very much afraid if the seventh package will ever be born, because as you can see, we are having quite a lot of internal problems, and we need to keep unity. And it will not be that easy after 4 months of this terrible war. So this is the situation we are dealing with, and that's why we need a new impetus. And that's why I'm very happy for this candidacy status and all the activities which will be done.
Well said. We have time to take 1 or 2 very quick questions. I see a hand over here and a hand over there. Why don't I take questions from all of you at one go, and then I'll try and put them to one of our panelists. I believe a mic is coming round to you. If you could go first. Mic there, and then also right there, row 2.
Hi. Hello, my name's Sandra Kaduri from Keeping Channels Open, a new dialogue network. There's high public support in Europe for Ukraine right now, but I'm really worried how we're going to sustain that public support for an expensive Marshall Plan when there's cost of living crises for people, when there's disruptors and propaganda around ready to exploit grievances. So how are you going to maintain public support and investment in Ukraine's survival and reconstruction?
Okay, great question. Let's just mull on that. Over there, if we can take a question from the gentleman in the second row here.
Hi, Joanna Bryson, Hertie School, Center for Digital Governance. This is aimed about the imperialism, over here, the imperialism of Russia, but also the recovery, thank you, of Ukraine. The tech industry. So one of the things we see frequently is that you have autocracy associated with extractive resources are easily monopolizable, where things that are more distributed, like agriculture, and I think also the digital industry might be something that could have been a different source of power. Now we're seeing both of Ukraine and Russia. Well, we're seeing them a lot in Berlin, the former tech workers. So I wonder if you could talk about that dynamic in those economies and also that power structure.
Thank you, Joanna. And I'll just take one last quick comment there. Yes.
Yeah, Pavlo Bogachenko, civil society activist and GMF Team Fellow. I'm from Ukraine, and confiscating Russians assets sounds, as for Ukrainian, is a great and fair idea. But in practice, we see lots of debates over it. We have example of Canada, which started to implement it. We see some debate in the US over this. So my question, Ukraine needs money now, assets frozen right now. So the question, how do you think, how realistic is to get consensus on this, and how long it's gonna take us to get this consensus and confiscate the assets? Thank you.
Okay, I only have time to put all of these questions to one of you. Hannah, I'm going to nominate you.
I second that nomination.
No, let's.
Oh, you want to pass?
No, I second her.
Oh, okay.
No, because I think it's really important, the question we always raise in the US, in UK, in the EU about confiscation and legal instruments, because it's one of the key questions for us to have funds. But also how to maintain public support. I think it's really important to keep doing what we are doing, fighting, winning the war, explaining Western societies the price, because actually Ukraine victory is preventing devastation moving beyond Ukrainian borders. So actually, give us weapons, we will do the job. We are not requesting like American or UK troops. And what is really mentioned, you mentioned unity, which is really important, not just within the EU, because we were a little bit disappointed with this sixth package and why it couldn't happen earlier. Even the Nord Stream 2 deal, actually we could avoid this. But the question is now even like sanctioning Kirill, who serves the evil, you know, this orthodox, I would not even say leader, actually. And why? UK impose sanctions, EU and US not. And also, I think bravery is needed. We are talking about a long-term solution to deblocate Black Sea and to avoid the hunger threat. But where is bravery? What we've seen last year with UK defender, UK Royal Navy defender. Remember what UK did last year in the Black Sea. Actually, we have to defend the freedom of navigation, because what Russia is occupying now in the Black Sea is a size of South Korea, more than 130 square kilometers. Can you imagine this big size? Why Turkey, US, UK, Romania, Bulgaria, and other NATO countries allowed Russians to monopolize, to control the Black Sea and turn into the Russian lake? So the bravery we have to demonstrate, because the success would have been happen if we avoid the full-scale war, and not now to think how to prevent a food crisis, energy crisis, and others. So this is like we Ukrainians are fighting every day. Yesterday I was praying and saying, thank you God, because two of my friends, one in the battlefield, it was like 100 meters the rocket, and second in Kiev, he was also sending me pictures what happened with his flat. So, but we are every day taking risk of our lives. But we will do this because it's in the interest of not just Ukraine's existential war. It's about existence of democracy. And this is why bravery, unity is key to not just to stop, to punish, but to do, to guarantee that never again totalitarian regime will never attack any sovereign state in any continent of our beautiful planet.
And I have to say, Hannah, it really helps to have people like you come to forums like this and describe what you've just described, because I think it's through stories like that that we renew a sense of mission, a sense of hope, a sense of what needs to be done. We are way over time, and I know I'm going to get into trouble, but I've been told very quickly a final word from Sharon Fitzgerald, who is with DLA Piper. Sharon, we are over time, so I'm going to ask you in a minute or so to give us a sense of lessons that you've learned through your work of reconstruction in places like Afghanistan. If we can get a mic over to you. You are mic'd. Okay, take it away.
Yep. Hi everyone. Thank you, Ravi. So for over 6 years, we worked with the Afghan government, donor organizations. We reformed legislation, procured infrastructure, and we tried to unlock investment opportunities. The government in Afghanistan was a reforming government. It had the support of the international community. It had significant funds which were committed to it. There were some successes, but there were mostly failures. So Ukraine isn't Afghanistan, but the lessons that I've learned, which I think are relevant in terms of the reconstruction in Ukraine, relate to, first of all, funding. The funding needs to be what the country needs. In Afghanistan, what we saw was not all funders, but some funders funding only projects that they were interested in, not what the country needed. There were conditions associated with funding that were at times unreasonable and unrealistic. So in terms of procurement and contract administration, there were there was challenges associated with fraud and corruption, unsolicited proposals rather than procurement competitions, and there was a general failure in terms of stakeholder engagement. So for Ukraine, and apologies, I'm going very fast, but I would be saying that what's needed is project prioritization. It's figuring out what is needed and when. It's the mapping of stakeholder donor commitments, other sources of funding, to make sure that what is spent is not duplicated funding and there's not funding that's wasted. We need to think about harmonization of donor requirements. So rather than there being 20 different procurement processes or conditions, we need to think carefully about that. In terms of procurement, it needs to be clear technical specifications. Procurement competitions may be difficult because what will need to be done will be on an emergency procurement basis. We need to think about what happened on COVID, the fact that there was so much procured on an emergency basis, but there was money wasted and PPE equipment that wasn't fit for purpose. So I would suggest that there needs to be thinking done now in terms of the use of frameworks, so that there can be pre-qualified bidders in specific sectors, in specific regions in Ukraine, and that those frameworks can be used, whether it's a direct award of contract or a procurement competition. And finally, thank you very much to the German Marshall Fund for organising today's conference. The fact that you're all here shows that we're having the meaningful stakeholder engagement that was missing to a large extent in terms of the reconstruction of Afghanistan. Thank you.
Sharon Fitzgerald, thank you very much. And with that, we're out of time for real this time. So thank you, everyone. We have another session coming up. That's on a Marshall Plan for Eastern Europe. I'd like to welcome in Terry Schultz to take over on that. Thank you to our guests, Martin Krul, Odile Renaud-Bessard, Hannah Hopko, and Congressman Steve Cohen. Thank you, all of you. Pleasure. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much. We have a bit of a set change here, so I am waiting for the